I'm Jim Benson. This is my slide deck format, so if you were in my previous talk, you may recognize that it looks somewhat similar. How many people were in the earlier talk? Okay, just a couple. So really quickly, a little bit about me. I got started in psychology and went into urban planning and managed really large things. And then started a software company. Then ended up doing what I do now, which is basically walk around and talk into microphones. But mostly what I'm trying to do now is I'm kind of on a crusade to help software development not be what it is right now, which is the most flawed human endeavor ever. Our quality in software development makes the 1970s American auto manufacturers look like they built flawless machines. So one of the things I've been working on recently is better ways to actually develop software. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in 20 minutes, which isn't a whole lot of time. So I also had this slide up earlier today, which is how many people here know who Deming was? Okay, you should find out. So Deming was basically the father of all of the stuff that we do. Not that he was in tech, but that he was into actually thinking about your work in the 40s and 50s. And where the hell were all you people? Come on. Sit down. So Deming said at one point that if you don't know how to ask the right question, you're never going to solve your problem. And just a few moments ago, John basically said this, which is basically, if you actually knew what your customers do, your shit wouldn't be so shitty. And so, what we would actually like to do is actually understand not just what the customers do, but actually how we work. So there's a lot of, we've gone through a lot of fits and starts, and we've done some funny things. Like, how many people here use user stories? Yeah, let's see if we can't stop that by the end of today. So user stories were something that made a lot of sense because they were the first effort for us to try and understand our users. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to walk away from functional requirements and start to do user stories. But what we actually did was we just used the same functional requirements and we put as a something or other, I will functional requirement, the something something. I find that amusing. So Deming also said this, that things don't happen all at once. We don't just dump an idea into a hopper and we get a product out of it. And so we want to, I didn't change the title list. I put this in my slide earlier actually. So we want to build learning organizations to build our software. And we talk about this a lot. We talk about how Agile is supposed to help foster learning organizations and things like that. But what we really want to do is build something that actually allows us to understand what the market needs or what our users need, and then to learn from that, adapt to that, and change with it, and hopefully change with it slightly before our competition does. And we want to do this by involving everybody that's in the company. So we can't have research and development groups. The world works too fast now. It moves too fast for that. So GE Appliances, they have a research group. And that research group puts out about 2 or 3 test products a year. GE also has a thing that I talked about this morning called First Build, which is a co-working space for building appliances. And they release one thing a month. They're running circles around the R&D department because there's lots of people coming in with lots of different ideas. And these are all market-ready things that they're releasing. So we know that the purpose of business is to actually make money. And this little thing doesn't, pretend there's a laser there. Businesses actually want to make money. And you make money either by high margin items or low margin items. So the more something becomes commoditized, the less likely you are to make a lot of money off of it, which means that invention is the way that we actually make money. So we're not just about developing software, we're about developing software or products that are actually going to delight and surprise people. And so we want collaboration to do this. We want to have lots of minds. We want to put lots of energy and effort into this. And we want diversity of thought. So if we have, say for example, a team and that team has a product owner, the product owner takes responsibility for knowing what's happening in the market and then letting the team know. That means that all the people on the team stop using all of their minds to innovate. So one of the things that I would like to do is I'd like to point out that innovation isn't just one dude in a chair somewhere saying, I have had an amazing idea and we are going to build it now. It is actually a collaborative process with a lot of people behind it that aren't interested in mediocrity. So we will not build mediocre things. We will actually take a little bit more time and build fewer great features than one or two crappy features. We want to have lots of options when we're building software. We want to have lots of options when we're building our products. And so in order to do that, we have to build systems that allow us to efficiently find those solutions. And I'm going to skip over to this slide because this is a fun slide. So I'm going to try this. I've never had to tell this story in like 5 minutes. So here I'm going to try and tell the story in 5 minutes. So this is a traffic management office in Texas, a traffic management center. Years ago, my software company had a project or a set of projects with a company called Econolite, which is the largest traffic signal manufacturer in the world. And they said, or actually in the US, I think that Siemens might be larger than them right now. But they took us out one night, and we're sitting there, my business partner and I are sitting there with their C-level staff, and they gave us lots of bottles of wine. And at some point, they reached the point where they had given me one too many bottles of wine. And I told them, I said, all advanced traffic management systems on the market today are crap. And they said, well, gee, Jim, it's nice of you to say that, as our two biggest products are advanced traffic management systems. Does that mean that they're crap? And my business partner is saying, shut up, shut up, shut up. And I say, yeah, that is actually what I'm saying. And they said, well, what would you do differently? And I'd say, well, I'd make them collaborative. I'd make them cross-jurisdictional. I'd make them proactive rather than reactive. I would change the way that the signal timing works. And we just went through this whole list of things. I'd make it GIS-based. And they went away for a couple of days, and they called us up and said, would you build that thing? And we said, yeah, we'd love to. And they said, great, write us a spec. And we said, no. And they said, well, don't you want the work? And we said, yes. I said, well, then you got to give us a spec, because that's how things work. And we said, well, no, because that thing that we described for you, no one's ever built it before. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know what's going to happen. So they said, well, you're not filling us with confidence. And so I said, well, okay, guys, look. I said, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to write my spec, which is going to try and push all of the risk onto you. And you're going to take my spec, and you're going to read it, and you're going to say, oh, no. And then you're going to give it back to me with new language that pushes all the risk onto me. And then we're going to push and push and push. And in the end, we're going to get a document that has way more detail, doesn't give us any flexibility, and neither of us are satisfied with. And they said, well, we're a 115-year-old company. We really don't know what else to do. I mean, what else should we do? So what we did instead was we said, look, we'll have no spec. We're going to write up a bunch of high-level things that are going to happen. We're going to put all of the work that we're doing into a Kanban. Every morning, you're going to meet with our distributed team on Skype, and you're going to attend our stand-up meeting. You're going to see what's on the board and what we're doing, and you're going to make every decision with us. So give us a burn rate. We'll work together collaboratively, and we will innovate, and we will build the best system that we possibly can. And they said, that's weird. And we said, well, we've developed other things that you said were impossible. So can you just trust us? We'll do this for a couple of months. Take whatever burn rate you want, give us half of it, and a promise that if we take away all of the coordination costs and building all the things that we didn't need to build, that we'll build this a lot faster. So what we did was we took the complexity that was inherent in contracts, and we took that away from the relationship. so that we could recognize and actually work on the disruptive complexity of building a new product together. And it ended up working really, really, really nicely. They learned with us as we executed the project, which meant that as we went forward, they didn't question all of our decisions after we made them. It was brilliant. Total transparency, totally open. But we told them up front, look, we don't know how these things are going to work out. Everything we're doing is a hypothesis. We're going to do it. We're going to test it. We gave them 10-minute releases. So everybody checked in their code every 10 minutes. So we were doing, in 2005, real-time release of a fully, a full enterprise scale product. Drives me crazy today when people say, continuous release, you can only do that if it's on the web. It's like, no, you can just get over yourself and do it. So one key thing here is that work isn't linear. And I have a Kanban up here on purpose. So I'm like the Kanban guy. We build Kanbans all the time. They look really linear. See, like, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That's very, very organized. How many people have that happen in real life? Yeah. So what happens is like things actually they go over here and they bounce around and they do some stuff, which doesn't mean that the Kanban isn't valid. What it means is that we need to build our boards, if we do this, in a way that doesn't have linear flow. Because one other thing that has linear flow is underpants gnomes. And so basically here we have the thing that we think the business is going to do, and then I really have no idea, and then we get lots of money. So this is what John was talking about the strong business plan, but not the strong team. So I'm going to skip past that because I don't care at the moment. This is the thing I really want to talk about. And I can do that because I have the clicker. So this company that we worked with, Limeade, in the Seattle area, we first walked in and started working with them. They were a typical startup, and they were a typical successful startup. And in essence, anymore, I'm believing that if you show me a successful startup, I show you something in peril. All successful startups are just about ready to have the wheels fly right off and the car smash into a wall. And so they were no different. And partly it's because when you get successful, you start to think of all the cool stuff that you could or should be doing. And so you start doing it all. So we arrived and said, how many projects do you have in flight? And they said, not that many, like 15. So how many people do you have? And they said, 26 developers. And I was like, 15 products for 26 developers seems like a lot. How many QA people do you have? 5. I might see a problem there. So we talked a little bit, said, I think you guys really need to limit your work in process. You need to limit the number of projects you have so that they're actually completable. And much to my shock, they did it. I left for a week and they came back and they said, okay, we took those 15 projects and we've moved that down to 5, and that will shrink even more after these 2 projects that are almost done are done. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. I'm still utterly shocked. So what we've done first is we've allowed them to build now a software development system that actually is operating within its capacity, right? And that's awesome, but it's only the first step. So when we say in Kanban, you're supposed to visualize your work and limit your WIP. That's great. That's so that you can go on to do the real work, which comes next. So it's kind of like the entry level. And so what we did with them was they already had their corporate and product strategies, and they weren't quite willing to let go of those. But what we did is we said, okay, the next thing I want you to do is I want you guys to set up 3 strategic intents. And these are like super high level statements that one of theirs was that they wanted to have the best user experience in their market. Another one was that they wanted to have data-driven, they want to be internally data-driven so that they knew everything that their customers were doing so that they could constantly improve the product. So things that were that big. And then as soon as those came out, of course, the product owners and the middle managers were like, started salivating, and they're like, ooh, let me build projects around that. And that was exactly what we did not do. So the next thing that we did was we said, okay, no more projects ever. No projects. What we're going to do instead is we're going to have big and small bets. And so here's the deal. If you have a company and I tell you that you are the manager for a project, the first thing that you're going to do is think of all the things that should go in that project. And then you're going to think about all the things that you'd like to have in that project. And then you're going to think about things that maybe you could make an excuse to put in that project to make the project a little bit bigger. And then you'll think of some things that you don't trust anybody else not to do, and you'll just stick them in the project because you want to do them. And what happens is the projects get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, the larger the project, the more likely it is to fail. The larger the project, the more micro failures you will have. The larger the project, the bigger pain in the ass the project is. So in Seattle, in 1989, I helped write a report saying that the Alaska Way Viaduct, which is a major artery in Seattle, was actually unfit for travel. Okay, it's still up. People are still driving on it. And several years ago, now it is several, there was a vote. And that vote was whether or not we should build a new viaduct, or if we should dig a tunnel. And this is part of what John was talking about question the initial problem, right? So it's what's called a false dichotomy. So do you want this or that? Well, I want neither. What are you going to do now? Or give me both. What are you going to do now? So my response to that was that we should do neither. We should rip it down and we should build a surface street and be done with it. They chose not to do that. And what they chose to do instead was build the world's largest boring machine to dig this tunnel. What could possibly go wrong? So they built this literally 4-story by 4-story, because it's round, right? 4-story boring machine. They dropped it underground. It went, started to dig a hole, and then it went maybe about 300, 400 feet, hit a pipe. It's been sitting there for 2 years. Big solutions don't solve things. So if I tell you build a project, you'll go crazy trying to build a big project. If I tell you it's a bet, a very different part of your brain fires. And you're like, I'm not going to bet all my money on one thing. Why would I do that? So what happens is now we have these 3 strategic intents, and we go to everyone in the company, and we say, how would you like to satisfy these bets or these intents over the next 3 months? And everybody comes up with tons of ideas. And you group some of them to create some big bets, and you let some float on their own to create small bets. What happens now is that the coding teams have very small chunks of work to work on, which are well-defined, have a well-defined hypothesis, are testable, are trackable, and have a very low pain for failure. So you work on one of the big bets and it's going to take 3 weeks. You get about a week into it and you're like, this kind of sucks, and then you don't do it. Who cares? If you have a project, then you've taken everybody and you've assigned them to this team and you've made a whole structure around them and stuff. So we're taking the complexity out of the working environment and actually just focusing on the solutions. So now we have these big and small bets. These big and small bets are actually elucidated as a hypothesis. So we've gotten rid of the user stories and we've just replaced them with straight up hypotheses. So I believe that if we do this, this outcome will occur. And then when you give that to a developer does a very funny thing, because developers are kind of cranky. They're kind of little bitchy people, and they're like, you give them a hypothesis and they're like, I don't think that. And so they'll try to disprove it, which is exactly what you want them to do. So if they sit there and write some code and they can't make it work, they're going to abandon it. And in this case, it's not because they failed, it's because they actually did what they're supposed to, which is show that that wasn't a valid hypothesis. The other thing that they'll do is they'll do a couple of spikes to see what might work best. So all of a sudden now you've actually got some fodder for some A/B testing that you can release to the actual customers. And it's fun to watch. It's also fun to watch how much relieved people are for having not less work, but better defined work. A lot of cognitive ease comes from actually knowing what you're doing. Who would have guessed? This also means that some of these small bets can be doing things like, again, like what John was talking about, where you could have a small bet, which is, let's get in the car and go see what our clients actually do. That's really hard to do when you have a project. Because when you have a project, you're like, got to finish it, got to meet my sprint goals, got to do this, got to do that. But this, it's like, no, my bet today is actually to call up a customer and talk to them. You know, and they do that. These guys do that a lot now. One of the other things that the bets did for them is it let them break down silos. Because now it's not part of a big project. So now it's like, I think if we went over and worked with customer success for a day, we could come up with some ways to fix these things. Or customer success themselves may have come up with a couple of these big bets or small bets. And you get together with them in your dynamic or your cross-functional team now. So it's not just cross-functional team within development, but within the whole company. And soon everybody starts to get a better appreciation for what the whole company is doing, what the product actually does for the customers, and work flows very smoothly. So then you launch your released code, and you actually then learn from it. So our Kanban boards now don't stop at done. There's a second Kanban over here, which is what have we released, and then what are those things that we've released doing? How are they working? And then that learning comes back along here and pops back up with new ideas for improvement. And if this didn't happen already, we wouldn't have version 2.0s of things. So one of the things we're really trying to get away from here is assuming up front that we actually know what it is that the customer wants or can use. We are assuming that we have an idea or an hypothesis. So we want to focus. We want to ask the people basically, are you overloaded, which is what I talked about this morning. Is your group overloaded? Can you describe your system? And do you know what you're building and who you're building it for? I have been painfully aware the last 2 years that absolutely zero of my customers knew what they were building or for whom they were building it. And they come in and say, can you help us build a Kanban? Can you help us build better processes? And I'm like, don't you think it'd be a good idea if you knew what you were building and who you were building it for? And they're usually like, well, we don't have time. We don't have time to know that, right? So it'd be nice to be able to answer those questions and to answer them correctly. And so if you want a focused organization that will allow this type of work to happen, people have to not be overloaded. Their whip does need to be limited. The company itself needs to not be overstressed. And then you need to be able to know what it is that you're developing and who you're developing it for. After you get those done, it's actually rather trivial to actually release good software. If you can't answer these questions, then all you're really doing is chasing your own technical debt. So we create our own technical debt largely through overload, not because of the tools that we use or the process that we use. And I believe that is the end of my 10 minutes. I still got about 5 of them, so I'm going to make something up. So actually, one thing that I would do very quickly then, if I have a couple seconds, is go back to this and say one more thing here, which is this thing here at the end, which is for Limeade especially, they've actually reached a point now where they get excited if they put something in this lower scrap heap. And they've actually done 2 things. One is made it okay for you not to release something when you get to the end. And then the second is to actually start selecting big and small bets that will retire old code that wasn't necessary in the product anymore. And I know that everybody here has probably touched at least one code base that has plenty of extra stuff in it that doesn't need to be there anymore. So that's the only thing I'd add to that. Any questions? Is everybody going to go do this? Or do you think it's crazy?
Looks pretty cool. Okay, so thanks a lot.